episode 476 of Retro Encounter, RPG fans' usually bi-weekly podcast of many topics. My name is Zach Wilkerson, and I will be your host today. And we are here to talk about a game that came out, I think, in 2019. Is that right? I should know that. It came out around 2019. We actually had a spoiler cast on it many years ago, but I decided that since it's now firmly in the retro category, that it was time. We pulled out a vote, and we are going to be talking about 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim. That Vanillaware game that's sort of like a mix of RTS, VN, adventure game. I don't know. We'll get into it in a second here. But before we do that, let me introduce the panel, starting with you, Ben.
Hey, I'm excited because, I think we were all on the Vanillaware episode we did, right?
And well, I wasn't.
I wasn't either.
Oh, never mind.
It was just you, Ben.
Oh, well, I was on it. Sorry. I've done so many with you guys, so I guess I just assumed. But this is the only Vanillaware game that I hadn't played. So at least that's like possible to play, translated in some form or whatever. So I was really excited to play this one.
Awesome. And Aleks.
Oh no, we started this podcast and now all my clothes are gone. And I'm only 15 years old. If you think that's a terrible first impression, that's exactly the first impression this game gave me.
Yes. Actually, Aleks, that's why I hadn't played this game, is that entire concept on its own is why I avoided it for like 5-6 years.
Well, usually I'm like, hey, let's talk about our history with the game, but we've already dug into it a little bit. So yeah, I know that Ben already sort of talked about it. So like you're a Vanillaware fan, but this is the only one that you haven't played, and I'm going to be kind of curious as we're going through and chatting about this game to kind of talk about how it fits into some of the Vanillaware oeuvre. But Aleks, I'm not sure. I know this is your first time playing the game, but I'm not sure how familiar you are with other Vanillaware games, or I don't know, any other like sort of history with the developer or the game.
Yeah, not a huge history with Vanillaware, but they have been on my radar for quite a long time. Like, I think the first time I heard of them was like when Odin Sphere came out. I think that was like the first time they got like quite a bit of buzz. But it's never a game we owned. Like the PS2 was my brother's territory at the time. I was mostly on Nintendo consoles, so it wasn't something I ever got to check out, even though I was pretty curious, and like I remember seeing the nice art style and things like that. But then, like I said, I mostly had Nintendo consoles growing up, and so I had a Wii, which was for an RPG fan. I was kind of starving for anything RPG related, and that's actually where my first encounter with Vanillaware happened with Muramasa the Demon Blade, which again had that really nice art style, and I ended up picking up and really enjoying my time with it actually. Which I think it's like usually like considered kind of one of the lesser Vanillaware games in its reputation, from what I'm aware. And it's true that the game didn't have like a ton of like combat variety or depth. It was kind of like a side-scrolling beat 'em up in terms of its style, but I just thought it felt great. It looked and sounded amazing, and it used that like Vanillaware classic art style to represent like a really compelling vision of mythical Japan, which had all these like kind of folklore and kind of Buddhist elements to it. So that was a really strong impression with my first Vanillaware game. And then I didn't really play another one until Unicorn Overlord dropped just a couple of years ago. Or was that just last year? I don't know.
2 years, I think.
2 years ago. Yeah.
Well, we're in 2023, I think, right? Or
right,
no,
right.
Maybe it was 24. No, I think, yeah. So,
but it's 26 now. So
oh my God, yeah,
24,
exactly. Sorry, yeah. So almost 2 years ago.
Yeah, and I thought that in terms of like a strategy game design, like it was excellent. I remember being a little disappointed in the story elements, but it wasn't bad by any means. But like 13 Sentinels was really the one I've been like had on my radar. I've been waiting for an excuse to play it. Heard all that talk kind of when it came out around how it's like maybe one of the best stories in video games of the past decade. A lot of people compared it to like Nier Automata in terms of its like complex storytelling, and I mean, I'm not done it. I wouldn't go that far with it, at least so far. But
Yeah, me neither.
it is a cool game.
Yeah, Alex, it's interesting. You said that like Muramasa is considered one of the weaker ones. I would say that that's true of the Wii version,
Hmm.
but the Vita version is much better, and I think generally considered like one of their best, because of the changes and the additions that they made to the to Rebirth, Muramasa Rebirth. And
Hmm.
then it's good you haven't played Odin Sphere PS2, because if you want to play Odin Sphere, you should just play Leaf Zero on PS4 or Vita, because that version also like fixes basically everything that was wrong with the original Odin Sphere. So yeah.
Yeah, I have had my eye on that Odin Sphere remake for quite a while now. So I'll probably dip into it eventually because I just love the way Vanillaware's games look more than
Hmm.
anything. And I think the Muramasa remake is only on PS Vita, which
Yeah.
that's the reason I haven't played it yet. I think.
Yeah. Unfortunately, hopefully, I hope they do something with that, um, with it again, because it really sucks being stuck on a platform that barely anybody had, because it really is such a good upgrade to that original game. Completely different, new localization, and there's like a bunch of new side stories with new characters. So you're talking about like the gameplay
Mm.
limitations, or that how they kind of plays the same. Well, they kind of have like four new characters to play entirely differently. So that addresses that too, which is really cool.
Yeah. Hope they port it to some modern platforms.
Yeah, so I think that I'm actually the least experienced Vanillaware player here because, and it's not because I haven't wanted to, it's just sort of been like, it sort of passed me by. This is my very first encounter with the Vanillaware game, and it's not, again, anything against them. I think that Unicorn Overlord, I heard the story was just bad, and I don't know. Again, I sometimes with strategy RPGs, I'm like, it depends. Sometimes I think they're too easy, and I heard that Unicorn Overlord is too easy. um, and Odin Sphere, we've had a card on it on the Retro Encounter like idea board for like years, and I've just been waiting for that to happen. And that's actually true with this game as well. Like I actually bought it, my not my wife at the time, but before she was, we were dating even. Alana basically said like, "Oh my gosh, this game's amazing." She actually reviewed it for RPG Fan back in the day, and I was like, "Oh, I got to pick this up. I got to do it." And then I don't know, I just waited and waited and waited, and now here we are. And I interestingly think that I'm further along in the game than the other two panelists at this point. But yeah, I don't have that experience with sort of the different sort of styles. I think it's really interesting that Vanillaware just kind of makes like very different kinds of games. And the thing that kind of like threads through, and a lot of them is the look, and the look of this game outside of the some of the character designs, which we'll get to, is indeed magnificent. It's great. It sounds great too, man. The soundtrack of this game is excellent.
Yeah, it's interesting. You bring up Unicorn Overlord, Zach. I actually think that this game and Unicorn Overlord are kind of two sides of the same coin, where you can kind of see the seeds of Unicorn Overlord kind of being planted with this game. But like this game is very much like, I think we'll probably talk about this, but the strategy battles, like I think are like, I enjoy them as being part of this game, but they're very easy. And but the story is very much the focus. And then I think Unicorn Overlord is kind of the opposite, where
Yeah.
they kind of take the basic foundation of the strategy battles that are in 13 Sentinels, and then really kind of expand on that in a really like mechanically satisfying way. But then the story in Unicorn Overlord, which I don't think is bad, but it's very like traditional, like strategy RPG storytelling, very heavily draws from like early Fire Emblem, or some of the early like Shining Force, even a little. And so where it's just kind of interesting how they kind of have that dual focus, where like here the storytelling was very much the focus, and then but I think they liked the gameplay style that was here, and so then they kind of did the opposite for Unicorn Overlord. Like, okay, we're going to do just a by the numbers story, and then focus all on the strategy mechanics. And so they kind of are a nice pairing in that way. And I definitely would recommend, if you enjoyed the gameplay in this one, checking out Unicorn Overlord at some point.
I mean, we'll get to the gameplay, but the reason I enjoy the gameplay in this is because it's a style of game that I'm usually kind of bad at. but it's so easy that it makes me feel like a god. I'm like, oh, look at me. I really figured it out this time. Look at me. But then everybody figured it out, it turns out. So yeah, I guess to kind of get into the game from like a broad perspective, I said this at the top, but 13 Sentinels is a blend of sort of a few different things. It's a very storytelling heavy game, but it's not just sort of one genre. So eventually you will have 13 protagonists to play through, and essentially you're going to like pick a different protagonist, and then you can play through like sort of usually about 12 or 13% of their story, and then you can kind of flip at the end of that to a different story if you want to. Sometimes there are locks on the story, and the locks usually make sense because like if you played through the story like before you did like some other thing, then you would be spoiled on this, and sort of the surprise would change, and so that's a big part of the way the story is rolled out here. But along with that, so actually in the stories itself, it's like kind of like a walking simulator. You're kind of walking around. Every one of the different stories is told a little bit differently in terms of like sort of what the adventure game elements are, and the triggers as you're talking to people, where you have to like select the right words or have the right word, or in some cases talk to someone at exactly the right moment. But we'll get into that later. And so I think it's sort of interesting that they do it that way, but then sort of on the side is sort of a separate thing. You have these RTS things, which you don't have a lot of context for at the very beginning of the game, but they sort of walk you through it early on in the introduction and the prologue of a lot of these different characters, sort of how to play it. And you're just sort of like on this like in this city, and you're like moving mechs around, and you have different skills that you can use, like long range attacks or close range attacks or shields if you ever would need them, which you don't. So I think it's sort of an interesting blend of things, and I'm not sure how I feel about the mech fights sort of happening almost like to the side here, where it feels so separate from the story for so long. I think it sometimes kind of takes the impact out of it, and like they're having conversations where I'm like, "What are you guys talking about?" So let's start talking about by talking about the RTS stuff. Like, what did you guys think of it?
Yeah, so you mentioned the way they're like kind of separated the VN parts and the combat sections like in the menu. I actually thought that was kind of interesting. And we're not going to get too much into story stuff and spoilery stuff, but to talk about it in like a very broad sense, like there's kind of like a lot of like thematic engagement with like timelines and memory and things like that. And just the way you like end up progressing through like the different characters and things like that, it gives like everything this sort of like fragmented, mysterious feeling. And by separating those two things, I actually think it kind of ends up supporting that in the long run. Um, and it also like kind of like gives you like the whole presentation of this kind of like gives you like a lot of agency in terms of like how you want to like unravel the story yourself. Like what is most particularly engaging you right now? Which characters do you want to follow? Maybe you get a little sick of all like the story related stuff, or you feel like you need a break from it. Then you just swap over to the combat sections like that. I actually really appreciate the way it's structured like that. Yeah, I really feel like I as a player have direction in terms of like how I want to approach this game in a way that I can't remember any other game offering to quite this extent. Even though like this whole thing of like following multiple characters is not entirely new in video game storytelling. But just to touch on like the combat itself, I think the general design concept is cool. Just like this idea of making a more accessible RTS that almost has like turn-based RPG feel and kind of your bringing up the command menu and selecting moves. I think it feels very fluid and nice. And but like in practice, I do feel it's too easy and even more of a problem than that, like kind of just like samey. There's tons of moves, but most of them I didn't feel like I really needed to even think about using, even on the highest difficulty, which I'm playing on. For the most part, it's like, oh, big group of weak enemies spawn, go use AoE attacks. A big unit spawns, go use big armor piercing attacks, and then all these other mechanics the game introduced, I've like barely had to like engage with at all. So yeah, I definitely feel myself getting like burnt out on the combat quite quick, but because of the way it's blended in with the story, and that I have like this choice in terms of when I engage with it. I feel like that actually helped a lot in terms of like not getting too dragged down by my frustrations with the combat, even though like I don't mind the way it feels, and the general design is pretty cool.
Yeah, Alex, the structure of the game and the amount of player agency that you have to like progress, that was also what I was gonna talk about. So I'm glad you brought that up. I think that if there's one thing that's like the most genius thing about this game, it is the structure.
Hmm.
And the game has a very intuitive way of like as you progress in each storyline, like giving you little hints or connections between the storylines and how they weave together that naturally makes you want to go to a different character storyline and then see it from their perspective, or you learn a bit of information about a character or about an event, and then that makes you think, oh well, I heard something similar in this other character story, so now I'm going to go hop over to theirs, and like that level of um plotting and pacing and letting you as the player just like make your own path throughout the game. Like I can't imagine what the like narrative planning for this game must have been. It must have been so complex to do that. But as the player, it's so seamless.
Yeah.
And I think that more than even the actual story itself or characters themselves is like the thing that's most impressive about this game. Like that you can approach it from any angle, take whatever route you want through the game, and then it all makes sense. And as you progress, starts to make more and more sense. And like I've never seen a game that has that amount of like variety and fluidity and the way you can chart your own narrative path through the game. And I think maybe that's why a lot of people talk so much about how impressive the story is, because from like a mechanical perspective and like a planning and plotting perspective, that is truly like unlike anything I've ever played. Um, whereas I think the characters and the actual narrative itself is very trope laden and like relies heavily on like references or pulling from other works. But I think maybe part of why they relied on that is because the complexity of actually putting it all together was so intense that it's helpful to then rely on those things um, with to kind of guide you, because the behind the scenes of what they're doing is so complicated. I don't know if that makes sense to you guys, but
Oh yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. Like I was waiting for somebody to say exactly that. That like, oh, like the story seemed to like flow so naturally in the way I approached
mhm,
it, because I felt the exact same way, and I imagine all three of us like experienced like made different choices in terms of like what characters we're focusing on next and things like that. And just to touch on what Zach said earlier, like there are like blocking like points of progression for each character's story, but you end up like unlocking those conditions, at least in the early game, like very quickly. So you actually have tons of agency in terms of like what order you're tackling like the different story progressions. And yeah, I felt it flowed completely naturally, which is incredible. It seems like you felt the same way, Ben.
mhm,
But then just to touch on that other point, like yeah, the plot itself is far from the most interesting or original. But the sense of mystery that like
mhm.
the game manages to build across like its nonlinear structure, like it's like the most like I felt like a video game be like a real like kind of page turner. I know there's no literal pages, but like that sense of like I finish one part of a character story and I'm like, oh my god, like it created like a revelation about like another character, and then I immediately swap to them to like see where they're at. And like I'm just like constantly compelled to like keep unraveling like this sense of mystery. And then like when eventual answers do come, like it's almost like disappointing in a way. Like it's not the plot isn't bad, but like that sense of mystery and like how it propels me forward as a player is way more interesting than any of like the answers I've gotten so far.
Yeah, I almost feel like, and I think we all were on the Disco Elysium episodes together, right? I feel,
Yes. Yeah, you
yeah,
got that one.
Yes, we
yes,
were
okay,
correct
so,
about that.
but yeah, like it to me, like the mechanics of the storytelling, like this is the most similar I've felt to something like Disco Elysium, which is crazy because like I don't think the writing and the actual storytelling is nearly even
that's a
approaches
wild comparison.
Disco
But
Elysium.
I
Yeah.
understand it.
But mechanically, like the way that they have like put the mechanics of experiencing the story in the hands of the player, I think is like the most similar in terms of charting your own path, and then everything you do like leading to an interesting thing, no matter what order or way that you approach
Yeah.
it. And that is just like really impressive. And as someone who's played a lot of Vanillaware's other games, like there's really no indication from their other games other than a little bit Princess Crown, which has some of this kind of narrative choice and branching, but not even nearly approaching this, that they would be able to produce a game like this. And it's like very, very, like I'm kind of wowed by that they were able to like create this system that is so complex with so many variables, and yet to the player it's like just a seamless experience. And yeah, I mean, it doesn't even really to me like matter if the story is even that good or the characters are that compelling because the way the story is told is so compelling.
Yeah.
It's it's interesting because I'm not sure that, because I think with Disco Elysium, like there are so many different ways the story might play out, right? Like you're
Hmm.
sort of going to end up sort of at the end point, at least to some degree in Disco Elysium, regardless. I mean, I know there's some
Hmm.
variation, but the story itself plays out wildly different based on your roles and based on your choices and based on whether you grab the necktie or whatever crazy stuff you do in Disco Elysium. The game rules. um, I would actually compare this game much more to like 999 or
Yeah, for
Virtue's
Yeah,
sure.
Last Reward.
that's a good
Uh,
comparison. Yeah.
because I think that, first of all, I think that the kind of story it's telling is much more similar to those
Yes.
things, like sort of this
Yes.
mystery box sort of thing, like what's going on here, how is it happening. But I think especially with something like VLR, when the storytelling is so like sort of big in that game, even though it all takes place sort of in the one space to some degree. But I think that it's all leading to the same spot. But like you can go down this character path, and it's going to reframe the way you see this other character path. And there's still like, again, there are locks the same way there would be in a 9.9 or a VLR or even ZTD if you want to be disappointed. And so I think that that is probably a comparison that I would make more. But the problem is for me on that front, and this is something that I was talking to my wife about because she loves the story of this game a lot, is that I already played 99 and 999 and VLR, and I think their stories are better than this one. um,
Yeah.
like 999, just like, not to spoil anything, but the end of that game just blew my mind. And that's not necessarily a criticism of this game because the way this game is told, and I guess to kind of get into some more of the nitty gritty here, like it's it sort of essentially takes place in, at least at the beginning, in a high school in Japan in 1985. And sort of the main ish character is a guy named Juro who just like loves like sci-fi fantasy stuff, but he keeps having these weird dreams that sort of flash forward to like 2025 or back to 1945. And then as you go, you start realizing that these some of these other characters are from different timelines, but like everybody's like having dreams, or time frames, I guess. But everybody's having like dreams of like going back and forth. And so like the way the back and forth there works is really weird. But one of the interesting things, and I'm not sure if you guys have noticed this, is like when you go to the archive, you can literally put all the events in order. And I don't want to spoil anything, but the very first event on there is not 1945. um, and so it's I guess my general point is like, unlike VLR or 999, where I was like super surprised by a lot of the revelations, I think this game, and maybe because I'm further along, is really fascinating in that I am not normally that surprised by some of the answers to the mysteries, but not necessarily in a bad way. Like unlike you guys, I've kind of, the way I kind of went through it was like, I really just, even though the RTS stuff wasn't very good, I just liked it. I thought it was fun and satisfying to just wipe out thousands of enemies quickly. So like I was like looking at the lock on that, I'm like, okay, what do I need to do to get to that? Okay, I'm gonna go do that. And so like I ended up finishing Juro's story before I even started Ogata's story, which is sort of an interesting way of doing it. But even with that, like some gaps are still getting filled in. And then like as you're looking at that archive and the mystery files that are also unlocked, like I'm not super surprised by these mysteries, but like I'm impressed by the way, as you guys have said, the way it's put together in a way that compelled me early on, but maybe I'm familiar with a lot of the inspirations for this game.
Yeah.
And I am also familiar with mystery novels. It's sort of like, when I'm not being a pretentious English teacher, that's what I read. Um, and so a lot of times when I'm like reading a mystery or watching a mystery, I'm like, oh, I knew the answer to that like an hour ago. Come on. And that was kind of like that for this, but I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up 999, Zach, because I actually just played 999 for the first time like a month ago. And I agree, like the tone and some of the kind of things that it's going for are somewhat similar. I think we're 13 Sentinels um is definitely like the narrative and the concepts. Like I think 999 is really good about like introducing really interesting heady concepts and then applying those to the characters in a way that is really interesting and compelling. And I don't think this game really does that. But I
Oh,
do
no. Absolutely not. Again, I don't think the narratives are comparable.
No, no, not at
Yeah.
all. But I the thing I like about this game compared to 999 is that it kind of sidesteps a lot of the like frustration or like kind of construction problems with like a classic like visual novel adventure game that like 999 kind of has, where you're never like, you don't have to repeat a bunch of stuff, you don't have to like go back and then redo a bunch of things just to get to a different branch. Like just that ability to like seamlessly jump around with points and never really be repeating anything, like it's just so nice, I think, compared to a lot of games in this style.
Mhm.
And it's almost like I feel like they had, I think too, like for a time travel story, like the way that the time travel is kind of implemented in this is very appealing, and like doesn't have a lot of the downsides that I think a lot of other travel stories have. And I think it's almost like a light bulb went off during development, that they were like, oh well, the best way to make this make sense is just to put it all in the hands of the player and then let them kind of do their own thing with it. And then the issues that kind of crop up with time travel narratives aren't as much of a problem, because you don't have this like linear progression of events that most storytelling follows, that then kind of makes time travel narratives like not work. It does. Am you guys follow me on this?
Absolutely.
Like,
Yeah.
okay. And I think that to me is like the thing that's interesting about this. And like I would say, like, at least where I'm at, like the use of time travel in this game, I think, is one of the best like implementations of time travel and narrative that I've ever seen. And I don't really typically like time travel stories for some of those reasons, but I do like it here. And I think it has a lot to do with just how they put the game together.
Yeah, I think those are good points, and just to like add to that and like these comparisons we've been drawing, like I think another reason this might have resonated with like a larger audience than like the Zero Escape games, is just like the presentation, like just the
Hmm.
fact that like instead of like it doesn't matter how much you like video game storytelling, it seems like visual novel type presentations just aren't like some types of players, especially like people who just like usually play RPGs or things like that, like they can't like really get into it. And like I was like that for a while too, but like games like 999 kind of helped me like appreciate like a VN style presentation a bit more. But this was just like much more just kind of like easy to like get into. Like you just have like these small little screens for like each little segment. You actually get to embody and like control a character. The art style, as we've described, is like completely gorgeous. So like as you're moving through these different like settings, like there's just that to appreciate. And just like yeah, that like ease of presentation, ease of play. Like this game is just like very accessible in so many ways. Like from like the RTS design to like kind of this light adventure gamey kind of presentation. It's like point and click kind of like elements are in there
Hmm.
too. And it just works, and it just feels like uh easy to get into, even if it's like not necessarily like always appealing to play in the long run. Because one thing I will say, and we talked a little bit about this like before we started recording, is like the for these adventure gaming segments, like the triggering criteria is like it's rarely interesting, and it can often be unclear. Like I feel like I'm either usually selecting like whatever obvious action or thought, and kind of like the keyword thought bubble you can like bring up for every character.
I mean, it usually just tells you which one that you need to select.
Yeah, it's like
That's the thing, yeah.
it's like zero engagement basically. Or at worst, I'm kind of like running around the screen until like I see a possible interaction, or like know how to approach a possible interaction in a way that can kind of feel a little bit unintuitive. So even though I feel like this is like a great game to get people into a visual novel style game, at the same time, like design wise, I feel like there's just a little bit too much friction to like work completely as a visual novel, and then there's also like not enough friction to work as like a real adventure game. So it kind of like
Yeah.
occupies this like awkward spot that is like
Mhm.
makes like the game easier to recommend to people, I think, but also like doesn't make for the best gameplay at the same time.
Yeah, I think I said, like, I don't know, like 3 times as I was playing this, again to my wife, I was like, "I would think this would be better if it was just a VN, man." I sometimes struggle with VNs, in the same way that I'm sure you guys do, and one of the reasons I like the Zero Escape games is because even though I cheat usually, the puzzle segments are there. But it because like the walking around stuff, like it's either like you said, like very very easy, or something extremely weird and specific.
Hmm.
Especially with like Iori's, where she has to pick, like, you essentially play the exact same segment over and over again, which I also find a little obnoxious. But you have to pick, like, oh, do I want to have crepes? And then you go get a crepe, and then you come back, and then in this one case, like, it's like, oh, hey, it's a kitty, you need to give the kitty a treat, and then you run for the kitty runs away. You go back, the conversation repeats, and then I try to inch towards the kitty cat. I'm like, ooh, maybe if I go to this kitty cat really slow, the kitty cat will take my treat. Like, nope, that didn't happen. And then, like, I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna like stand where the kitty cat comes in, and then when the kitty cat comes in, then I'll just interact with it immediately. Nope, that didn't work, because those are the things that made sense to me, none of which was very fun, but those are the things that made sense to me. But it turns out that you had to wait until like that cycling looping conversation stopped at a very particular point, and then for about a split second you could use a thought bubble on one of the two characters you were talking to. I think that's extremely unfun. Or like there's one with Juro where I played through it like 7 times until I figured out exactly like the right choices to make in terms of going to Amaguchi's house or not. And then eventually Amaguchi's like, I don't want you to come to my house, I got stuff to do. I'm like, what the heck? This is the exact same conversation we had yesterday or earlier, or like, and like I'm just like, and like I agree with you. I think that it's half baked, but it is definitely, it gets rid of some of the tedium and boredom of a VN where you're just like hitting A, you know? People make jokes about like the only button you need to beat Clear Obscure is the X button, which is obviously not true, but that's true with most VNs, right? And so I see what they were doing, but I don't think it was successful.
Yeah, see, I kind of disagree with you both here, because I think that, like, one, like, I think this game is very much like a a very basic, but nonetheless still like a point and click adventure game. Like, it very much follows in the line in terms of like the gameplay design of the adventure elements, with more the point and click side instead of the visual novel side, which I think you guys are both talking about how that makes the game, I think, a little more accessible. You're moving around a character on screen, so people are just more intuitively going to, like, if they play other types of games, like, that is more intelligible to them. And I agree with all that. I do think like that the use of like the keyword system, I actually think is fairly intuitive and does make the game more accessible compared to a lot of other point and clicks. Like, I don't know if you guys play a lot of like the classic like LucasArts adventure games, but like I feel like those games are really notorious for like the puzzles that like make like absolutely no sense, and you have like an item and then it's supposed to combine with another item, and like there's like almost no way you would come up with that on your
The
own.
reason I don't really play point and click adventure games is because I
It,
tried them in the early 90s and I just hate, first of all, and second of
yeah,
all, they sucked.
yeah. So I think this game actually does sidestep a lot of that with this keyword system. And I think there are some really interesting things that this keyword system does. Like, for example, like with when you're playing Natsuno's story, you have the little robot BJ. And like the keywords are often just
Phrasing.
like something you can something you can reference, right? Like It's more like information, but then some of them are also like items or actions too, right? And like I think it's actually very intuitive how they set that up. So with her story, like there's a lot of times where if a character's approaching, you have to put BJ in the bag. And so you have a keyword that is the PE bag. And so every time this happens, like you're like, oh, I need to select BJ and use the PE bag keyword. And like I think that kind of shows the versatility of the system that they came up with, that the keywords can be items, they can be actions that you perform with the environment or other characters. They can be just snippets of information that you need to reference to progress. And that to me, I think is a lot better than a lot of classic adventure game design, where I don't think that the items maybe are just very single use, or you have to combine them in ways that's not intuitive. Whereas this system gives you something that you can almost always use to both interact with the environment and other characters. And I think that's actually kind of an evolution in point and click design a little bit. Not to say that other more modern point and clicks haven't done similar things or more intuitive things, but I do think that the game deserves a little bit of credit for making that kind of system and that style of gameplay a little more accessible than a lot of other games in the kind of point and click
Yeah.
adventure subgenre.
Mm.
I see your point, and I understand it, but I guess to me my problem is like almost all that stuff with like the thought clouds or whatever, which I actually really like, because like if I'm going back into a story that I haven't done for like 8 hours, I like go through and I read the thought clouds. I'm like, oh yeah,
Hmm.
this is where we are, and I really like that part of it. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think it's like brain dead. Like it's just it doesn't. It actually literally tells you 95% of the time what thought you need to select to progress.
Hmm.
And so like there's no thought to it. There's no like consideration to it. There's no like, oh, it's just like it just feels like it's just there to give you the illusion of something that is different or unique. But I guess maybe, I mean, like, in the point to your point, like that is the point, right? Like
Hmm.
it's
Yeah.
there to keep you engaged, it's there to keep you progressing, it's there to keep you going. But to me, it just like it feels like, I don't know, like it's just like irrelevant. It doesn't really bother me. Like I said, it's not a big deal. The things that bother me are the like really opaque event triggering things.
Yeah. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I agree with you, Zach. Like it's not in any sense like interesting puzzle design. And I think like if you're comparing it to like something like 999, where they actually do integrate like very interesting environmental puzzle design with the escape rooms into this kind of narrative adventure game storytelling. Yeah, it's nowhere near that. But I think compared to a lot of other point and clicks where it's also not actually good puzzle design that doesn't make any sense, and it doesn't actually take a lot from the player other than just like trial and error. This is a much better system than a lot of those games I think employed. And I would rather it be like accessible and just a way to keep the player like engaged and be able to reference things than being like, oh, combine the rope with the rubber duck and then it does. You know what I'm getting at? Like, this is a much better
That sounds
way.
like a particular kind of game. Rope and a rubber duck. I'm gonna play that one.
But you know what I mean. Like
I
it's
do.
like that really obtuse kind of like point and click style where it's like it's not really a logic puzzle because there's no real logic to a lot of it. And this is like, okay, what we'll just get rid of all of that and we'll only use it as a means to like give the player something to do during these segments and make it a little more like interactive. And I do like that aspect of it. And I think it does make it more accessible in a way that I think a lot of people would find approachable, and be able to progress and also not just like have like lines of text at them, you know.
Yeah, I definitely do agree with that point as like a general design approach. Like I would rather like have this kind of like dulled down adventure game style than like the worst of like the LucasArts kinds of puzzles, like the duck and the rope. But like you cited a really good example with our boy BJ and like putting him in the bag during Natsuno's story. And like I agree that that is like actually like an interesting instance of like incorporating it into like kind of like a very light kind of puzzle solving way that I almost wish the game took more advantage of, because like
Hmm.
that's a good example. And I wish like with like the different character storylines and like the different events they go through, the different tones the writer is going for with each of them. I wish there were like more instances where like you are like just intuitively opening your thought bubble, selecting something for like an action and not just like to be reminded of plot elements. I think a little more of that would have actually been like appreciated.
Yeah, I
Oh,
agree, Alex. I don't think it's
yeah.
that concept is used enough. There's another example I can think of, which is when you're in Shinanome's story early, and she's given these files by Morimura about all the other classmates because she's supposed to be like getting intel on them. And then before you actually go up to the various, other characters, you have to reference the files so that she knows what their name is and like a little bit about them before you can actually interact with them
Yep,
with the
that's a
other
good
word
one.
clouds. Yeah, and that I thought was also like a really like it's very like it's very it makes a lot of like intuitive sense. Like, oh yeah, of course she's gonna have to do that. Like that makes sense in the context of the world, but then it's also like making you interact with this like as an object in a way that's more interesting than just like internal monologue. But you're right, it's not used enough. And they could have done a lot more with it. Yeah.
Yeah. And then just like in terms of like I agree with the pulling up like the keywords to remind yourself of where you are in that character's story. I think that's great. But then like you guys know like the moments where like you have those like green like rectangles in like the top right of your screen that
Mhm.
And
like
they just refresh and you have to like go get rid of them over and over again. Yeah.
yeah. So like that yeah, that's
Yeah.
annoying for one thing, but also like sometimes the what the character's thoughts are on a particular keyword are updated and then like the little rectangle like fills in with green. But
Mhm.
then when you pull up the menu, you have no idea which keyword has been updated. Like there's no way of
Yes.
telling. So if you want to like get a character's updated thoughts, you basically just have to like re-listen to a bunch of crap over and over again until you find the one that's been updated. There had to be a better way of doing that.
I
That's
mean,
kind
Yeah.
of one of my frustrations also.
if you're colorblind, you have to do it every time anyway because I can't tell the
Oh
difference between the
no,
Oh
yeah,
colors at
because
shoot.
it's
all.
red and green, and
Yeah.
that's like a super common color.
Yeah.
Oh my
Yeah.
god, I didn't even think about that.
Yep. It's a
Yeah,
true
the
story.
UI I think in this game does have a lot of problems, and it's like they went for that minimal UI to like focus on the art direction, which
Mhm.
like in some ways like makes sense. But I do think this is a common problem with Vanillaware games. Is like this is like everybody at Vanillaware is an artist, like a visual artist first and foremost, and then they all have like other jobs. So even like a lot of the programmers are also visual artists, and so like I think that they have such a commitment to like the visual aesthetic experience of the game that other parts of the game suffer. And I think this is a very good example. Like the UI, especially in the adventure game portions, is so minimal that it actually does get in your way. And it could use maybe a little bit more like indication to the player. Yeah.
Yeah, I think when you're talking about presentation, like the UI, I don't really have a problem with it. I think it's for the most part relatively intuitive. Besides the fact that I don't like the green dot thing and like the colors, especially with like the actual thought clouds, like they look. I'm not kidding, exactly the same to me. It drives me a little crazy.
Yeah, that sucks.
Um, but
Yeah.
I think that the RTS section sort of suffers from that as well, because like especially as you get further in, like it becomes very important to identify like what's a flying enemy, what's a non-flying enemy, what is an armored enemy, because like 70% of the enemies become armored as you get like into like the third wave in particular. So it adds like a level of complexity to it. Still not very hard. I've S ranked almost every single one the first try, except for like two. And one of the times it was because I just didn't realize there was a wave coming towards my sort of my base. And I was like, oh, there are those guys over there. I forgot about you. And then I wiped them out immediately. I just forgot. But I think that the visual presentation is like weird in the RTS sections. Like it's so beautiful in the storytelling, but like it's like bad, I think, in the RTS sections.
Yeah. It's just because you really have like, and it's almost like they're going for like a Space Invaders thing. Like, I feel like that's what the enemies kind of look like, right? Like Space Invaders enemies, like when they're on the map. But that makes them really hard to like visually distinguish between. Like at first glance it's really hard to tell like what's a molar and what's the one that is like a circle, like a circular that blows up or what. Like they
That's
look
one of the
so
biggest
similar.
problems, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And you also aren't getting like the visual splendor that you're used to in a vanilla war game. Like if you like mouse over the moves that your characters can perform, they will show you like an animation of what the mech does, and that's cool. But you don't see that in battle at all. And like I understand that it's probably impossible to implement like animations for like 13 different mechs like all at once in this battle. Like that's obviously there's just not possible to do. But it doesn't mean that the game, like those sections, you just feel like you're looking at a radar screen, right? And that's not really visually satisfying in a lot of ways. Yeah.
Yeah, you can tell their expertise is more in 2D art, because when I
Mhm.
started like doing like the battle sections, I'm like, man, this is it. Like this is all they got, like this like really like zoomed out 3D
Mhm.
like representation of a city that feels like completely lifeless.
Mhm.
Yeah, it was a bit of a shame. And not being able to like clearly identify enemy types is a pretty big problem.
Mhm.
Fortunately, it's easy enough that it doesn't really matter, like in that instance Zach was describing. Um, but I will say, like, one thing I genuinely enjoy about the combat is when there is like a group of like a bunch of little enemies and you shoot like a big AoE, just like it sounds like popcorn is popping off, and it's just like,
Yeah.
man,
Yeah.
that is
Big numbers.
It's
joy to
very
my
satisfying.
ears.
Many numbers.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
and then beyond that, just like kind of like the light RPG-ish aspect to like character progression also feels a little like uninvolving. Like managing 13 characters, especially right off the bat, is a lot. There's all these moves that you're like not really sure which ones are actually the most useful, which ones kind of suck and you shouldn't invest in. And like I
Mhm.
was just like dropping upgrade points into whatever because I just didn't want to like think about it too much. And like the game's easy enough that I don't really have to think about it too much.
Yeah.
So that kind of like more macro level aspect to progression through that section also, yeah, was a little half baked.
Yeah, I think like speaking of UI problems, like I didn't realize that you had to go all the way to the deploy button and then hit customize there to do the overall team
Yeah,
customization.
I didn't even realize that until the second wave, and I thought at first that you could only do it like because you could actually upgrade things in battle. I didn't realize that.
Oh, what the
Um,
hell? I didn't know
Yeah.
yeah,
that
yeah. It's like you can
either.
actually use like your meta chips in battle to like I don't know,
Oh.
and for like probably 2 or 3 fights, that was the only way I thought I could do it. But I was on Amaguchi and I accidentally hit R1, and I was like, oh, you can do it over here too.
Oh,
And
that's
then like
crazy.
I was like, oh, I was like leaving all these meta chip multiplier things on the table that like would
Mhm.
have made this even easier. I was like, oh my gosh, they definitely they like over explain like the basics of combat in the
Yes.
tutorial, but then
Yeah,
they deeply under explain, even though it's not very
the
hard,
progression
the
elements. Yeah.
progression behind the scenes.
Yeah, yeah, and it's just, and like you were saying, Alex, like it ends up, it's these are all flaws that like if the game was more difficult would be like fatal flaws, but because the game is not that difficult, they don't end up really mattering.
Mm,
But it's like, well, that's kind of unsatisfying in itself, right? Because there's so much potential, I think, for this system, but it doesn't really realize that. And I think it strikes me as like somewhere along the lines in development, they realized that like the combat system like had all of these flaws, and so they just tuned the difficulty back so that like it would be like doable, right? And that was probably the right choice, but it does make the like gameplay RPG kind of strategy elements a little more like perfunctory than I would want in a game like this. Yeah.
yeah, that sums up a lot of I think what we've been saying. It's just like all these frustrations kind of we've been getting into. It's like, yeah, it's probably the right choice for what they were going for, I guess, but it's still like a minor element of like tedium in the overall experience of the game
Hmm.
that I think holds it back a little bit as a whole, even though like I'm still like genuinely enjoying my time with it in both the combat and story sections and the way they're balanced. Like combat is really like in the end what like 10, 20, 15% of your overall playtime, I think it
Hmm.
seems. Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's just light enough to not be like a big issue, even though like the design flaws we've been discussing are like undeniable.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think it's interesting how much like Unicorn Overlord is like trying to address a lot of those things. Like
Mm,
it's like, what if to me that game is like, what if we actually went full bore with like the combat system that we kind of developed for this game, and then also has, because you like go into those 2D combat scenes, has the visual kind of splendor you expect from Vanillaware too, And so it's just interesting to see kind of the origins of what they would later do with that here. And I mean, for a first run, it's not terrible, right? But definitely not what it could have been.
Oh yeah, and then another just annoying aspect of the combat sections is, and we alluded to it a bit earlier, but just like, oh yeah, now all your teenage characters are just in like, well, the women at least are just sexually explicitly posed naked in their mechs, and that's your
Yeah.
character portraits. Is just like, and also I feel like the dialogue is just for some reason worse in the combat sections. Like they like almost like lean into the tropes that they're like trying to kind of get away from in the actual like story segments.
Hmm.
I don't know, like the dialogue I felt was very awkward at the end of like all of these missions.
Yeah, it's also too they don't, I think it's part of it is they don't know who you're going to deploy. So it's
Yeah,
like they can't really make the interactions that important. I think the ones where the bonus objective is to deploy a certain character, usually that character will have something interesting to say in the battle if you do deploy them. But other than that, like I totally agree. It's like there's not they're mostly like gameplay related comments, I feel like,
yeah.
or just like general comments about like the situation, but not very engaging in that sense. And it does make the combat feel very separate from the narrative, because you're not really getting bits of interesting narrative perspective or lore or whatever during the combat sections. Yeah.
I will say that changes maybe a tiny bit as you get further in, because like a lot of the locks on the combat become like very specific later in the game.
Mm, mm.
Okay,
Like
cool.
the lock to even get into wave 3 is to clear Juro's story. And Juro's story has
Oh.
a lot of stuff at the end that I'm not sure how happy I am that I cleared that one first, because there are a lot of things that I sort of predicted that I was like, oh yeah, that's definitely true now. And then some other things that I didn't know as much, but then it's kind of like taking some of the air out of some of the other stories as I play through them.
Hmm.
But I like I said, I it's funny because I feel like we've all been very negative about the RTS to a large degree, and I think it's fair. But I actually like have fun with it just
Oh
because
yeah. I
I
That's
like
like
it
fine.
too.
I
Yeah.
Yeah.
like blowing away like 6,000 enemies at once, and at the end, like in the third wave, they start just like dropping like wave after wave after wave. Like they'll drop like 8 waves around the map all at once of like 1,000 enemies, and they're like all different types. So you have to like think about like, okay, I'm gonna move like these 2 types over there. It's still not that complicated, but like, but then
It's
even
engaging
it's engaging
enough.
enough, and
Yeah.
they end up telling some story stuff a little bit through it. But even now, like I don't know like when this fight is happening. Not exactly. Like what's the timeline? Like the
Yeah.
timeline. Even at the point I am like I'm like I said 75% of the way through the story. Um,
I
so yeah.
do I do have a theory, and I don't know that this is true. Maybe we'll find out by the end, but I feel like the combat scenarios are all the same timeline. Even though the
That's what I
stories.
thought too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, I not to spoil anything. I'm not spoiling anything really. That it's absolutely correct. I
Oh,
think.
okay.
I
Yeah.
unless I'm missing something. I think it's all happening like at the same moment. I just don't know when that moment is.
Yeah. And I agree,
Because
Zach.
yeah.
Like, we're being pretty critical of it, but I think only because there's a lot of potential here that's unrealized. But
Yes.
like, for compared to other adventure games that put in gameplay elements to try to add variety, like what comes to mind is Danganronpa, for example. Like, I think the gameplay segments in Danganronpa are almost universally terrible, and this is not that. Like, I think these gameplay sections, they do not detract from the game at all. Like, yeah, they have unrealized potential, but I never was like, oh, I'm dreading doing the combat. Like, no, I found the combat engaging. It was fun. It was enjoyable, and it does tie in enough, like thematically with the narrative that like I think they do support each other well in that way. Whereas like yeah, like something like Danganronpa, it's like why the hell am I doing this? This sucks. Like I just want to see the story, and I never felt that way with this game, and I think that that is to its credit for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely more unrealized potential in term more than just like an unrealized idea. Like the ideas are
Hmm.
good. It's just like the execution isn't always there.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not like again, I'm the same way. Like I actually started this game like pretty late, and then I blew through. in like 3 days. Like I'm on vacation, so I had time, but in like 3 days, like I blew up through like most of the fight and 75% of the story segments. Like it is, for all the things that I'm criticizing it for, it seems to be working for me, right?
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
it's too easy, but it engages me enough that like I actually want to unlock more of these battles because I enjoy being good at something. I am compelled enough by the way the story is told. And so I think that, especially as we get into the second half, because listeners, if you haven't figured this out yet, we're not going to talk a lot about the actual story itself this time because, we all have experienced various different things. And you as listeners, if you're playing along with us, which you're welcome to do, we don't know what you've experienced, but I do at least want to like talk about the characters a little bit before we
Mhm.
sign off,
Mhm.
and just kind of dig into like the different flavors of their stories. Talk about some early favorites. We don't have to talk about all 13 of them, although I am going to name all 13 of them in a second here. Yeah, I'm going to try at least. And for the record, as I've said like 17 times in this podcast, my wife played through this game already, and so I was like, "Hey, can you like put together like a character list for me?" Because like I know who these people are like by their faces, but a lot of times like they'll be talking about a character and like, who is that? And I don't know if it's just because like I struggle with Japanese, like distinguishing Japanese names or what, but um,
Well, and it doesn't help that multiple characters have multiple different names.
yes,
So,
That does not
which
help. No.
which there are reasons for, which
yes, very
you will
interesting
just
reasons for, but
you will
yeah.
discover more about that later as you guys play through. But so here are the 13 characters, and then we can kind of talk through like the ones that we find interesting, kind of the flavors that we like, the flavors we don't like. It is sort of in the early going. We're not going to get too far into any of these character stories. But first we have Juro Karabe, who's I guess probably sort of the protagonist here. He's the first character you play with in like sort of the forced prologue. He likes mech movies a lot. He has these weird dreams all the time, where he seems to be like, in some dreams he's like murdering his friends, in other dreams he's a good guy. It's very confusing. We have Iori Fuyusaka, which I'll just say right now, like I finished her story, and I find hers to be the least engagingly told because it's all like, let's go get this food, and then like let's do this weird trigger, or not. That's where the cat trigger happens. But she
Yeah.
sleeps a lot in class. She has weird dreams. She looks an awful lot like the school nurse who also wears black and shoots guns in the future. Yeah, I actually don't even know exactly how that ties together yet.
Well, I
Tom,
think it's almost like I think you're right, Zach. Like her storyline is like maybe the least engaging, but she's so important to the other ones that I
mhm.
think maybe that's why, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
Then we have no, it's okay. Then we have Tomi Kurosagi, who has pigtails and glasses. We know that she's from 2025.
Mhm.
We have the best character in this game by a huge margin. If anyone disagrees with me, goodbye. You're forever banned from this podcast. Yuki Takamiya. She's just awesome. She's from 85, I think. But
Yes.
like her sequencing is like very Sherlock Holmes in like a very like obvious way. Although I think sometimes some of the adventure game stuff there is a little annoying too, but I'll get into that. We have
I think
Shu
your love of
Amaguchi.
Kaine is showing here, Zach.
My love of Kaine is always showing. I like women who yell, which is funny because my wife is nothing like that. So we have Shu Amaguchi, who's one of my least favorites because he can't stop hitting on my girl Yuki, and also it's just like sort of a womanizer. He's rich and he like sees a TV where like this idol is talking to him directly. We have Kitaro Miura, who needs a better fitting hat because he's always holding it when he runs. He is from 1945. He was sort of in the Pacific War. He gets transported in 1985. We have Natsuno Manami, who likes sports and she likes track, and she's the one who carries BJ around with her. Nenji Ogata, very bad hair. Very bad hair. Rage issues. His dad works for Shikishima Industries, which we'll get into. Megumi Yaku Shiji, which is one of my least favorite stories, which we'll get into. It is very much it is like so directly inspired by magical girl narratives that they actually name it Madoka. If you've ever watched that anime, which is a much better story than hers. Ryuko Shinonome, she has bandages. She has to take pills all the time, which I actually think is kind of a cool adventure game thing to get to your point, Ben. Like she'll like
Mhm.
be walking around and like you have to like, oh, gotta go take the pill. Takatoshi Hijiyama, he likes war as well. Doesn't like war. He's from 1945. He was a soldier, gets transported in 1985, and he really likes yakisoba pan. And he likes it so much that I was like, hey Alana, can we like make some yakisoba.
Yeah.
He makes it sound so delicious.
I
I've never seen
know.
anyone
I
love
had the
food so
same
much in my
feeling.
whole life. And then Renya Gyoto, who you actually don't know very much about at this point. He wears
Yeah, I haven't
glasses.
even unlocked his
He's
thing yet.
supposed to be
Yeah.
like a sophomore in high school or whatever, but like he looks like he's 60. Uh, his progression is gated behind, like, you have to have every other character at like 80% before you can progress past his prologue. So clearly he is meant to be endgame. And then you have another favorite of mine, a Sekigahara, who basically wakes up with no memory. People, at least, are calling him 426. I can't say much more about that. The 426 thing is very important. I'll just say that throughout all these storylines. So anyway, that's a whole lot of me talking. And I've already sort of given some of my thoughts. But what are some of? And I think one of the things that's interesting here is all these stories are told differently. They're all little different mechanically. Sometimes I think to their better, and so they're worse. They have oftentimes very specific. You can go read interviews where the creator will be like, this very specific 1980s anime inspired this character. Evangelion inspired Ryuko Shinonome. Terminator or ET very clearly is in Natsuno's, right? So there's a lot of very clear inspirations, but they're all telling the story in different ways, sometimes more successfully, sometimes less successfully. So in the early going, who's most compelling? Which ones do you like or don't like?
Yeah, so I like Natsuno Minami. She's like basically the Fox Mulder of this game. She's obsessed with like aliens and government conspiracies and stuff, and she's also like kind of the jock, I guess. But she does a lot of like, you have a lot of like agency over the time traveling in her storyline, which I think is interesting. And she's the one who has the robot BJ that she kind of carts around with her. I just really like her. She has a very like friendly and warm personality, but there's like a little more to her than just that. I also like that she's one of the female characters that isn't just pining after a male character, and that's like half their personality, which is true of like Megumi and Shinonome, which I don't really like that as much. Like, not that the romance angles are always bad, but just like they're so focused on that element that I don't really like them as much, just because it's just kind of one dimensional, I guess. I also really like Ninji Ogata, because I really like the way his storyline progresses, where he's like in this like Groundhog's Day kind of loop. Um, and that does kind of bring in some of the like point and click kind of progression issues that you guys were talking about before. But I just
Yeah,
think the like execution, like narratively, of his storyline is kind of cool, where he just keeps coming to this train platform and then has to like do something different in the train platform to like get a different thing. Like, I like the construction, I guess, of that story.
Yeah. And I thought that Ogata's moved pretty quickly too. You know what I mean? Like,
Hmm.
what didn't feel. My only problem was I'm an idiot. This is actually not the game's fault. It's my fault in this case. Like, every single time after like the first couple of times you do it, and they get on the train and the train crashes or whatever. Every single time that happened, like, I was like, I'm gonna walk left, and then like I'm gonna get in a fight, and then I went through that loop like 9 times before I realized, oh, I can walk to the right.
To the right, yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Because I don't know why, I just like, it did not occur to me at all that Iori and Osuno, or I can't remember. I don't know, the smart kid was going to be over
Okino,
there.
or
Yeah,
yeah.
Okino. Yeah, yeah. It didn't even occur to me, but yeah, I agree with you that I think that it works there, and especially because like as you get to the end of that story, and I won't get to any particulars, like there's enough sort of changes in the way the Groundhog Day thing is fleshed out that I think is cool, and I just like the character. I think he's funny and interesting, and plays some really important roles in some other storylines that I think is awesome.
Yeah, I actually like Amaguchi also, even though he maybe doesn't make a great first impression, because like he is like, we're not really going to get into this, I guess, but like he is a very important character, and like especially as the game progresses, there's like a lot more depth to like him and his whole situation, and like the contrast between him as a kid and then the later timeline of him is like
I like how
crazy.
you're talking around this. Yeah, it's very
Yeah, yeah.
good.
And that is like super interesting. And then I think also like Fuyusaka is just, because she's so like integral to so many parts of the plot. The teenage version of her is not that interesting, but you know, there's other things. She becomes much more interesting, I think, too.
This is one I'm not really going to get into right now, but I think it's the one I've progressed the most. It's Juro, who's it makes sense because he's the main character. Why his would be interesting, but I think like the way like the different branching paths, like they end up feeling like pretty intuitive in terms of like the way that you're put back in like the same situation as you often are in this game and like asked to explore like alternative possibilities. I thought his just always felt intuitive. I think like just the overall sense of mystery that builds around his plot is like really well done in general. Like I was always engaged. I always wanted to advance Juro's story whenever it became possible. So I understand why you got so far into it, Zach, and maybe I'll just like avoid getting quite in as deep into it as you did, just like avoid those like kind of
I mean, I will say
frustrations you ended
that
up having.
because I played Juro's story like all the way through before I'd really even progressed anything else past 60%, is that well, the real reason I did it was because it was a lock for the fights, but it's the one that genuinely surprised me a couple of times. Like
Yeah.
it didn't genuinely surprise me in terms of some of the things that I think it sort of revealed about the overall world state, but in terms of there are like two things that are very clearly references, and one of them is embarrassing that I didn't catch it. The other one, like, there's no way I could have known at that point. It genuinely surprised me, and I think that it was engaging throughout. I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
So
like Juro as like his personality as a kid, I think is the most appealing to me too.
mm,
Like he comes off very like endearingly, and it I think that adds a lot to like the progression of his story, like what's actually going on with him and what happens to him almost is made more tragic because he's just like a very kind of endearing, likable character.
yeah, and he's like I agree he's like very like endearing and likable, and but then like there's this weirdness around him at the same time where it's just like he has these like weird dreams, sometimes like murderous dreams, and he's like I don't know, he's always like weirdly calm about the way he like approaches like really like shocking things that happen that I think like add a lot of like intrigue to his personality, and like you find out like some of the reasons why that might be the case. But yeah, just it's clear that like he's kind of the protagonist, and like they really wanted to make his really wanted to execute his storyline well, and I'm loving it so far. But to just pivot away from something so we don't have to get into spoilers, I really enjoyed. We talked about her already, but Ryoko Shinanome's one, because like this is another one where like you're kind of it's like kind of Groundhog Day-ish, similar to Ogata's, but it's like she's clearly being like there's like these higher powers, I guess we could say, that are like having an influence on these teenagers' lives, and with hers you really get to see like the extent to which it is like impacting them, and like there's like these weird like kind of visual glitches going on with hers, like the fact that like you have to actually like select the pills that she's on like kind of like periodically throughout her thing to like avoid like a fail state, is like some of the most compelling kind of adventure gamey elements that feel intuitive, that feel narratively impactful, and I just like really enjoyed what I've experienced from her storyline so far.
Yeah, and I'm trying not to spoil this because I know that Ben, I can't remember if it was pre-recording or during. Like you said, you
Mhm.
didn't really like Shinonome as much because she, as many of the characters in this game, embodies sort of like this obsessed with a man thing.
Hmm.
Um, and I will say, to the game's credit, and I'll get more into this later, I do think that there is a function to that that's actually sort of like the opposite of the trope. It's actually sort of criticizing that idea because you discover that there are reasons behind a lot of these things that are much bigger and deeper than that. And so I think that the way that she sort of gets used up and tossed away is I actually think pretty compelling, and as a big Evangelion fan, like
Yeah,
the references to that being so clear,
she's Ray
uh,
Ayanami
yeah, she is
basically.
just
Yeah,
Ray,
Yeah.
yeah, she just
yeah.
is, and I think that Ray is a great character. Where
Hmm.
ultimately, I think that this actually kind of goes in some ways deeper than that in terms of the way she gets used up and sort of tossed. So it's actually one of the stories that I have progressed the least, but I know a lot about it because I've progressed a lot of other stories. Because we talked
Mhm.
about this, like I know a lot about it, so I am compelled to discover more of her story at this point.
Yeah, I want to bring up Miura too, because I think
Mhm.
his is interesting, because he is from 1945, but he also has these like early on in his narrative jumps to like the furthest in the future of any of the characters, where you're like 2104 or some, I think is that, but
It's
anyway, very
twenty-one
far.
eighty-eight, I believe, but
Yeah,
yeah,
or
it's far in the
yeah,
future.
yeah.
Yeah,
So it's even further, yeah. Which I think is like really interesting to have this contrast between like the midst of World War II Japan, and then you're getting these flashes of like the very far future. So having that kind of juxtaposition in his story, I think is really interesting. And I have no idea where that's going, but that is very compelling, I think. Even though he as a character, I don't know, is the most compelling, but like the circumstances that he's in, I think are very compelling. And he very much feels like a character that's just kind of like being like lost in the way in the current, like kind of just pushed around in different directions and doesn't have a lot of his own agency. But I like that, like, oh, like here's the start, like the earliest part of the story and the latest part of the story being pushed right into the same storyline is kind of interesting.
Yeah, I agree. Like personality wise, he's like almost like a bit of a dud. Like there's not much
Yeah.
to him at all. But like starting his story and like having like those flashbacks to, like World War II and like some commentary about like U.S. antagonism and like the
Hmm.
Western influence on like post-war Japan. Like it was something that I wasn't expecting this game to go to at all. But I'm like so interested that it did, and I can't wait to see like what it ends
yeah.
up doing with that.
Yeah, I think I'm glad you brought that up because I was surprised by that too. That like it seems to be very much about sort of like Western influence and pressing back up against that. Like when he first goes in, like when he first gets teleported to 1985, he's like, "I'm in America." Like all these sky
Hmm.
rises and anything without any like sort of personality, which is true. And the way that it comments on that, and I'm not sure if that's going to end up sort of like extending forward to the overall story, in terms of like sort of commentary on imperialism or Western influence. But I was like, oh, like you're doing like a little, you're poking the bear a little bit. I like
Hmm.
it.
Well, it's interesting too. I think that him and Hijiyama are both like very much like in that Japanese imperialist mindset from World War II. But I think, and I'm obviously not far enough to really see where the end state of this, but there's a lot of moments where you feel like the game is also pushing back against that as well, right? Like where they are given moments where they have to like question that dedication to like imperial Japan, and then also he thinks that at the initially that like the kaiju or the demos are like American weapons. But then
Mhm.
of course you very quickly find out like, well, they're products of this multinational Japanese corporation. So it's like kind of inverting a lot of their initial kind of protect the homeland kind of mindset that they have. And I think that's like a good way of introducing that. It's like, yeah, we're going to talk about American imperialism, but we're not also not going to ignore like the implications of Japanese imperialism for the time. And their view
Absolutely.
is like, I'm going to use these Sentinels to like have Japan win the war. But it's very clear that like the story is really going towards a place where like no, the actual like technological um, production of Japan is actually hurting the world in a lot of ways, and just in general of the human race is like hurting the world. It's kind of going to that way, so it's kind of makes you put you in their mindset and then is like subverting that, which I think is really interesting.
it, this game gets put on, as we discussed very early on, gets put on like this narrative pedestal, and like little like I don't know, sprinklings of that make me hope that maybe it's going to hit those highs. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Of like, oh, okay, maybe like the early going where I don't see all the puzzle pieces necessarily, even though I see a lot of them at this point. Maybe this is where it's going to do something really sort of fascinating, because putting it in the same conversation as Near Automata is at this point completely absurd to me. So,
Well,
um,
and it's like something like Near, I think, just does a really great job of like connecting the heady philosophical concepts to the characters. And I don't have an example of the game really doing that to a good degree yet. right? But maybe maybe it does that. But I'm kind of feeling like it's not going to get there. But we'll see.
Maybe they'll even explain why the teenagers need to be naked in their mechs. Who knows?
Oh my god,
I
that part
don't, I don't
is
think so.
yeah. And I mean, I guess we could talk about that too, like the tropes that this
Yeah.
like game employs. Like it does every anime trope. Like there's the beginning of Fuyusaka's story, she's literally running to school late with bread in her mouth, which is just like so ridiculous. And then there's a part where like she trips and there's like a panty shot at one point. And I was like rolling my eyes, like, oh my God. And there's just so many of those kind of like things in here. And like the thing you're talking about, obviously the most obvious thing is that they're all naked in the mechs, which like I guess in some like it's a little more equal opportunity because the boys are also naked, but like the the girls are also framed way more sexualized than the
Yes,
boys.
yes.
So and it's like I will say that like you do just start to completely ignore that aspect of the game almost entirely. Um, like when because it mostly shows up in the battle segments and you're so focused on like the battle segments anyway that you're not really paying attention to the character portraits at all. Like it becomes easy to ignore, but it's also like why is this even here in the first place? Like it just feels so unnecessary and like um just like crude in a way that doesn't belong in an otherwise more um like I don't know, a game that's trying to do maybe a more elevated narrative experience in other ways.
I mean, there's also just the character design of Miss
Oh,
Morimura,
Morimura, yeah.
which is
Yeah.
just like that's just Vanillaware
Yeah, it's very
indulging in
classic
their
Vanillaware.
proclivities. Because I
Yeah.
remember like one of the earliest instances I was like made aware of Vanillaware at large was that whole like Dragon Crown controversy
Oh, yeah.
of the booby sorceress. If you know, you know. And yeah, Miss Morimura is definitely kind of like falling into that. So yeah, I guess it's just Vanillaware doing Vanillaware things. At least they don't like, at least like it kind of like ends with her in terms of that.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's
Yeah.
definitely there. It's definitely like kind of awkwardly clashes with some of the other elements of the game.
Yeah, and I think too, like, there's a lot of there's like a major theme of the story is like the exploitation of these kids, right? Like that they're being used as weapons of war, that they're being, put in these impossible situations and the impact that that has on them. And I think obviously, that's pulling from Gundam, it's pulling from Evangelion, it's pulling from basically every mech anime that has any pretense of being about more than just like big mechs fighting, right? And so it's not original, but like I think that's executed pretty well. But the the having them be like naked in the mix like just so much undermines that point. It's like
Hmm.
you're trying to make this point and I think that point is like salient and it is well done in the other aspects of the game, and then you doing that just so undercuts that, and it's for nothing. I think that's what really bothers me about it the most is it's like there's no purpose behind it. At least with like you guys are bringing up near, like there's at least some sort of purpose behind like the sexuality of Drakengard 3 or the character design of like 2B or Kaine, right? But whether it justifies itself or not, that's your mileage may vary, but there's at least some kind of meaning or reason to it. There's just nothing here. And I feel like that is just such a big problem with this game thematically is that its willingness to just undercut itself like that. And that sucks.
Yeah, and I think that I mean the game engages in tropes on almost every level, right? And I mean I think
Hmm.
that's part of the point. And again, do I know if they're going to? I I I don't think there's any possible justification for making me look at like teenagers in sexualized positions in a Sentinel.
Yeah,
Like it's just like I don't care what your justification is at that point. If there's some like thematic reason, like at that point, like I don't know, like, at least 2B and kind of adults, right? Um,
exactly. Yeah.
so there's like a level to that that
Yeah.
I just don't care. But like it engaging is lots of other tropes, right? Like I obviously like Yuki Takamiya a lot, but like she's Sundari like to the core, which is just a
Hmm.
trope that I like, right? Like she's and she's not defined by other men, but like, even though men are into her, and she really is mostly interested in her friend, but like it's still a trope. But it's a question of which tropes that I can deal with and which that I think are just like distasteful.
Yeah, and like which tropes have purpose? Like I think
Yeah.
it makes sense when you have 13 different characters and then also a bunch of side characters that are important to like lean on tropes, because then you don't have to spend as much time to like establish the character to the player, right? So that's something where like it makes sense to have Takamiya be like this Sukeban Tsundere character, because then the audience kind of like knows and understands a lot about this character just to begin with, right? And so there's value to using tropes sometimes, but what possible value does the more sexualized elements of this game have? It has none, and it's actively detracting from it. And it's not that they're using tropes, it's that they're using bad tropes that have no purpose. And it just drags down the game in a way that's just disappointing, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I don't like, maybe we've been harping on this a little bit too long, but the one that really got to me lately was so like, yeah, Morimura is clearly like the most sexualized character in the game, which isn't, as you were saying, completely inexcusable in every way. But when like in one storyline, when she ends up being like transplanted to the body of a child, with all of her like kind of adult kind of memories intact and things like that, it's like, what was this really necessary to the plot? Like, oh my god.
Yeah, and they like it's not like the game they don't go in a place with that where it like could be really disturbing, but it's just like why?
Yeah,
I
it's
don't
just
know. Yeah,
why.
why? Yeah. Yeah. But I think it's good to talk about this because I mean, I know for me personally, this is the thing that kept me from playing the game, right, for all this time, is that it had this element to it. And I think there are probably a lot of people who maybe aren't super immersed in like anime and like manga and used to like ignoring those kind of things in media, that it would be off-putting to. So like I think it's fair to give it some time, because I think it is one of the
Yeah.
major things that has kept people away from it. Yeah.
No, I agree. I mean, I think about something like Steins Gate, which has different kinds of problems.
Hmm.
And like I've talked about Alana like 17 times today, but that's just the way it goes. I had to convince her. I'm like, hey, like you really got to watch Steins Gate. You don't have to play it necessarily, but like the anime is like really excellent. I know that like all this stuff with like gender is like really it's very troubling and messed up.
Hmm.
It's funny. I gave Steins Gate Elite, which is like an anime version of the VN, like a 95 early on, working at RPG Fan. And the only thing people would comment on Facebook was like social justice warrior, blah, 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 blah. I was like, I gave it a 95. Like, I have to
Oh,
acknowledge it.
because you criticize those parts of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
of course. Because they were distasteful. They were bad then, they're worse now.
Mm.
Anyway, so I agree. I like you have just like, because I'm very used to it, like eventually it just like washes over me, and I
Hmm.
just like I don't even care.
Hmm.
I've been invested in Japanese media since I was like 5, and so like to me I'm just like
Yeah.
and I know some people were just like it's part of the culture. I'm like no, it's really kind of not, and like
Hmm.
shut up. So anyway,
Yeah. It
um
is. It is very like easy to ignore, I will say.
yeah, I agree. So I think that that probably takes us to about the end of what we're going to talk about, because we're already kind of like pressing up against like the boundaries of talking past like the 30-40% mark. I think that both of you will probably like this game the more you play it. I think that as things sort of progress, I think things become more interesting, and as things become more clear, I think that things become more interesting, and I think that there'll be some surprises. So I'm excited to chat about it. And for the record, listeners, and meant to acknowledge this at the top, but I know this is coming a week late. It was the holidays, and things just sort of piled up. And it's still my intention for the next one to come in on time. So we'll be back to our regularly scheduled programming. So I apologize for that. So, uh, anyway, I guess I'll go ahead and shift into what's coming up next. So, obviously, in 2 weeks, we will actually, in 1 week, we'll be talking about 13 Sentinels again. We'll be talking about the second half. That'll be a much more story heavy conversation as we get to put all the pieces and parts together and as we get to see sort of how everything works, and to see if maybe there is at least some justification provided for some of our complaints here. 2 weeks after that, I think, I actually just floated this a couple of days ago to Aleks. It was his idea originally, is to have an episode about RPGs that deserve a perfect score, which is interesting that we're talking about this with Ben on the podcast, because he was the very first person in the history of RPG Fan to award a game a perfect score, and it was this last year. So you're welcome on that podcast if you'd like to be, Ben.
Oh,
but
I might be. I might. Yeah.
But anyway, so I'm not sure exactly how that's going to look. I have some ideas, and I'll chat with Aleks about it. But I'm pretty sure that's going to be the next episode after that. I think it's just sort of an interesting concept, especially with RPG Fan scoring system being out of 100, and like, what's a 100? You know. My students complain all the time that I never give them 100s on an essay, and I'm like, was it perfect? No. So if you want to get in touch with us, you want to email us, you can email us retro@rpgfan.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, X, Blue Sky, Twitch, YouTube. We also have a Discord. It's just RPG Fan. We also have a shop hosted by TeePublic, which you can get to through the website, or you can just Google it, where they have like t-shirts, mugs, things like that. If you want to represent us, if you want to support us in some way, that would be awesome. If you were looking for that Hyperplay RPG book, it is currently out of print, and we're trying to find a way to get it back in print, but we'll see what happens with that. We also have 2 other fine podcasts. One is Random Encounter, usually hosted by John O'Logan, about sort of random events, usually like sort of what's current, things like that. Then we have Rhythm Encounter, which is about RPG music. You can review us on Apple Podcasts, Overcast, YouTube, Spotify. I don't know. You're listening to us somewhere. You can review us there if you'd like. We'd appreciate it. And let's talk about where we can reach the individual panelists, starting with you, Aleks.
You can email me at alexfraniczek@gmail.com.
And Ben.
You can email me at benloganlove@gmail.com.
Perfect. And if you want to get in touch with me, that retro email works, or zachw@rpgfan.com. I apologize. Sometimes I'm better or worse at checking it. Someone pointed out that a couple of the recent podcast episodes had been, like, the last 10 minutes have been cut off, which I hope I fixed the problem. And I didn't respond for like a week, and so I'm sorry. So thank you too so much. I feel like our conversation ended up being like sort of weirdly negative in some ways, but like I think that, you know, this is a game that I actually think that, to me, like, I like it so much that like I want to talk about my disappointments and the ways in which it could be better, right? And so I'm really enjoying my time with it, and I'm looking forward to finishing it, and I'm looking forward to chatting with you too about the final moments. And thank you, listeners. Good night and good luck.